In the summer of 1954, Tokyo's Haneda Airport recorded one of its strangest arrivals. Among the passengers was a well-dressed man carrying a passport from a country no one had ever heard of, Taured. He spoke several languages, claimed his nation had existed for centuries, and even pointed to it on a map. Yet by morning, after being placed under guard in a hotel room, he had vanished without a trace. The door was locked, the windows sealed, he was never seen again. The summer sun blazed over Tokyo in July 1954 as Haneda Airport bustled with travelers. Businessmen in suits hurried through customs, families clutched luggage, and the sounds of multiple languages blended together in the crowded terminal. But among the ordinary passengers that day stood one man whose presence would spark a mystery that remains unsolved. He appeared middle-aged, dressed impeccably in a tailored grey suit, carrying a leather briefcase. His manner was calm, almost confident, as though he had done this countless times before. When he handed over his passport to the immigration officers, they froze. The document was authentic in every way: stamps, watermarks, seals, but the country listed on its cover was Taured. The officer frowned, flipping through the pages. "Where is this from?" he asked in Japanese. The man replied in flawless French, then switched easily into Japanese, his accent smooth, practiced. "Taured, near the border of France and Spain. Surely you've heard of it." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. No such nation existed. To test him, they brought out a world map and asked him to point. Without hesitation, the man's finger landed on the region between Andorra and France. "Here," he said firmly, "it has been there for centuries." Confused, the officials pressed further. He produced travel documents, stamped visas, and even bank statements, all bearing the name of Taured. The companies listed existed, but none recognized the country. The stamps from previous travels matched real locations, yet they came from borders that never existed. The man grew increasingly frustrated, convinced he was the victim of some elaborate mistake. "I've been traveling for business for years," he insisted. "I have meetings in Tokyo just as planned. Why are you treating me like a criminal?" Still suspicious, airport security detained him. They placed him in a nearby hotel under watch, assigning guards to stand outside his room. He was told the matter would be clarified in the morning. Inside the room, the man appeared calm, even resigned. He ate dinner, smoked a cigarette by the window, and eventually lay down to rest. The guards reported nothing unusual, no noises, no visitors, no attempts to escape. But when morning came, the mystery deepened. The room was empty, the sheets were still neatly folded. His passport, documents, and briefcase were gone. The door remained locked from the outside. The window had no balcony, no fire escape, and stood on the 15th floor. Authorities searched the hotel, the airport, even the city. No trace of the man was ever found. News of the incident spread quietly, whispered among officials but never formally reported in newspapers. To some, it was a bureaucratic error, lost in translation. To others, it was proof of something stranger, a traveler from a parallel world caught between realities. And as years passed, the story of the man from Taured became one of the most enduring mysteries of the modern age. The investigation into the man from Taured began immediately after his disappearance. Hotel staff swore he had been in the room the previous evening, calm and polite, even thanking them for their hospitality. The guards insisted no one had entered or left. The locked door and sealed windows confirmed it. Yet somehow the man and all of his belongings had vanished overnight. Airport officials were baffled. They retraced his steps, reviewing the records of his flight. Passenger lists confirmed he had boarded in Europe, though the departure point seemed unclear. Some records listed Barcelona, others Paris. His ticket bore the airline seal, genuine and valid, but the issuing office, Taured International, simply did not exist. The Japanese police launched a citywide search. Hotels, hospitals, and even morgues were checked, but no man matching his description was ever found. There were no fingerprints left in the hotel room, no evidence he had even stayed there, aside from the memories of staff and the written reports of the guards. More perplexing were the documents he carried. Experts examined his passport, noting that it was indistinguishable from those of recognized nations. The paper, ink, and stamps were authentic, yet the origin was impossible. His driver's license listed an address in Taured's capital, Tar City, a place no map acknowledged. His checkbook came from a bank no one had heard of, yet the company logos were printed with precision and consistency. Officials sent inquiries to European embassies. Replies returned swiftly. No such nation had ever existed. Some pointed to Andorra, nestled in the Pyrenees, but the man had grown angry when the comparison was made. Andorra is not Taured, he had snapped during interrogation. My country has stood for 1,000 years. Theories began to spread among those who dared whisper about the case. Some speculated that he was a spy using forged documents, though no motive or network was ever uncovered. Others suggested he was insane, but his calm demeanor, fluent language skills, and detailed knowledge of international business made that unlikely. A few, however, spoke of something stranger, a parallel world, a dimension where Taured existed in place of Andorra, bleeding briefly into ours through some unknown fault of reality. If that was true, then perhaps his disappearance was not an escape at all, but a return. The Japanese authorities quietly closed the case, filing the documents away in archives never intended for the public. Officially, no record of the man exists. Yet the story persisted, whispered by airport staff, passed along by investigators who couldn't explain what they had seen. Even today, nearly 70 years later, the mystery remains unsolved. Travelers through Haneda sometimes claim to see a man in a grey suit, standing near customs, a briefcase in hand, waiting patiently for a country that never existed. As the years passed, the tale of the man from Taured refused to fade. It became one of those stories told in hushed tones among airport staff, the kind of mystery that lingered in memory even when official reports were buried. What made it endure wasn't only the impossibility of the documents, it was the man himself. Witnesses remembered his composure. He wasn't frantic like a criminal caught in a lie, nor confused like someone suffering delusion. Instead, he was confident, even slightly offended, that others didn't recognize his homeland. When shown maps without Taured, he grew frustrated, demanding to know if the world had gone mad. Some officials who questioned him later confessed privately that they doubted he was lying at all. His knowledge of geography was precise, yet just a fraction off. He recognized France and Spain, but where they insisted lay Andorra, he argued with conviction, "You are mistaken, that is Taured. It has existed for centuries. I have visited your countries before, why do you deny mine?" When pressed about history, he named rulers, wars and treaties that no one else could verify. It was as though he carried an entire alternate timeline in his memory. The strangest part, however, was how ordinary he seemed. He wasn't eccentric, didn't speak in riddles, and didn't hint at supernatural beliefs. He was a businessman, an entirely normal man, whose only unusual trait was the existence of a homeland no one else had ever heard of. After his disappearance, theories multiplied. Journalists who dug into the archives found only fragments, references in police notes, the testimony of guards, whispers from customs officials. Nothing appeared in the newspapers of the time, leading some to claim the Japanese government had silenced the story, embarrassed by what they couldn't explain. Others leaned into stranger explanations. Physicists speculated, half seriously, that the man had slipped through a dimensional fault, a thin place where two realities overlapped. In one world, torture was as real as Japan. In ours, it had never existed. If so, his sudden disappearance was no mystery at all. He had simply fallen back into his own world. Paranormal enthusiasts built entire theories around him. Some said torture was proof of multiverses. Others linked him to UFO sightings of the era, claiming he was a visitor, not just from another country, but from another Earth entirely. Yet for every wild theory, there were those who quietly admitted the simplest possibility. Perhaps he had been erased. By whom and why, no one could say. But a man doesn't simply vanish from a guarded hotel room without someone or something allowing it. To this day, no suitcase, no passport, no scrap of evidence has ever resurfaced. If the documents were destroyed, they were destroyed thoroughly. If they were kept, they remain hidden in some locked drawer, far from curious eyes. Still, the story lives on, retold in books, whispered on late-night radio, and posted across forums where people debate the mysteries of our world. Who was the man from Taured? A spy, or proof that the barriers between realities are far thinner than we believe? In the years that followed, investigators and skeptics tried to dismantle the story of the man from Taured. Some argued it was nothing more than an urban legend, born from a misunderstanding at the airport. They suggested that perhaps the man was from Andorra, misheard or mistranslated by officials, and that the tale grew into myth as it spread. But those who handled him, the guards, the clerks, the officers who saw his documents, disagreed. Their accounts remained consistent. The passport was genuine, not a forgery. The stamps and seals were accurate in every detail, except they came from borders that did not exist. The man's anger, his insistence, his disbelief at their denial, these things could not be explained away by mistranslation. For many, the strangest clue was his behavior. He wasn't desperate to convince anyone. He was calm, almost bored, as though enduring the inconvenience of incompetent officials. His questions to them were the ones that haunted those who remembered. Why does your world deny mine? Why is it erased from your maps? The guards who watched him that night never forgot. One later admitted in private that he had been uneasy the entire shift. He said that when he glanced through the peephole of the hotel room, the man seemed blurred, not in movement, but in presence, as though the air around him shimmered faintly, like heat on pavement. At the time, he thought his eyes were tired. By morning, when the room was empty, he wasn't so sure. Theories about his disappearance multiplied. If he had escaped, how? The 15th floor window was sealed and had no balcony. The door was locked from the outside, and 2 guards stood watch the entire night. No one entered, no one left, and yet by dawn, the man, his passport, his suitcase, and all of his papers were gone. Paranormal investigators later compared the story to tales of time slips, where people vanish into thin air, sometimes reappearing centuries later, or not at all. They argued that the man's presence was unstable from the beginning, that he was never meant to exist in this reality for long. His sudden disappearance, they claimed, was not escape but correction, the universe snapping shut the fault line that had allowed him through. Others took a darker view. They suggested that governments knew more than they admitted. Perhaps he was taken, hidden away in some secret program, his documents confiscated. After all, during the Cold War, both East and West hunted relentlessly for spies, scientists, and secrets. A man who carried proof of a country that didn't exist would have been irresistible to intelligence agencies. But there was no evidence, no leaks, no papers, no photographs, only silence. And that silence is what made the story stronger. Because when questions go unanswered, imaginations fill the gaps. For Daniel and Mia, modern travelers fascinated by the case, it was not a story of espionage or fabrication. To them, the man from Taured was proof of something larger, a glimpse, however brief, into the possibility that our world is not singular, that somewhere out there across an invisible border lies a version of Earth where Taured stands proudly on the map. And maybe, just maybe, the man still walks its streets, never knowing that in another world his homeland has never existed. As the story of the man from Taured spread, skeptics tried to reduce it to a simple case of rumor gone wild. They pointed out that no official record exists, no government archive has ever confirmed it, and no major newspaper of 1954 reported such a bizarre incident. If it truly happened, they argued, it would have made headlines across the world. But the lack of records only deepened the mystery. Conspiracy theorists claimed the event had been deliberately erased. Some said Japanese officials were embarrassed at losing a man under their watch. Others insisted international authorities stepped in, suppressing the case before it could spread. After all, what government would want to admit that a man from a non-existent country walked freely through customs? Travel writers began sharing the tale in books of strange mysteries. Late-night radio shows picked it up, embellishing details until listeners couldn't tell fact from fiction. Some versions claimed the man had maps and coins from Taured. Others said he angrily demanded to speak to his embassy, baffled that no one recognized it. Over time, the legend took on a life of its own, bending and reshaping like the very reality it described. What remained constant, however, were the chilling details, the passport no one could explain, the map where he pointed with certainty, and the locked hotel room that held only emptiness by dawn. Psychologists offered another theory, that the story was a metaphor, a way for people to express unease about the modern world, about borders, nations, and identities. A man whose homeland didn't exist was the perfect symbol of displacement, of not belonging anywhere. yet others clung to the paranormal. The idea of parallel universes was no longer science fiction. By the mid-20th century, physicists were already exploring theories of multiple dimensions. What if, they suggested, the man had slipped through by accident, an error in the weave of reality? Perhaps he had spent his life believing Taured was as real as Japan or France, never knowing he lived on a different version of Earth. And if that were true, what did it mean for us? Did his appearance prove there are countless other worlds layered over ours, separated only by thin walls we cannot see? If so, how many more travelers had slipped through, only to vanish before being noticed? Witnesses at Haneda Airport described their unease, not just at the man's documents, but at his presence. Some said he seemed off, his aura unsettling, as if he didn't belong. Others swore his accent was impossible to place, a blend of European tongues yet distinct from them all. The more investigators searched for explanations, the more contradictions they found. Each detail fit too well to be dismissed, yet none could be verified. He was both real and unreal, documented and undocumented, present and absent. That paradox was what gave the tale its power. For decades, the story has lingered in the shadows of travel lore. It is retold in books, documentaries, and online forums, always ending the same way. A man vanishes from a locked room, his passport from a nation that never existed left behind, or perhaps taken with him into the unknown. And somewhere in the Pyrenees between France and Spain, a few still whisper of Taured, not as a myth but as a place they almost remember. A place that might still exist, just beyond the veil of our world. By the late 20th century, the story of the man from Taured had become a fixture in books about unsolved mysteries. Writers debated endlessly. Was he a clever fraud, an illusion born from mistranslation, or a glimpse into something science had yet to explain? For those who believed he was real, one detail remained the most troubling: the locked hotel room. Guards swore they never left their post. The windows were sealed, 15 stories above the street. No rope, no escape hatch, no trick was ever found, and yet the man was gone. His suitcase, passport, and documents had disappeared with him, leaving only confusion behind. One theory suggested he had bribed the guards, slipping away into the night. But if that were true, why was there no trace of him afterward? No hotel check-ins, no new travel records, no identity matches anywhere in the world. It was as if he had evaporated from existence. Another theory pointed to the possibility of espionage. In 1954, the Cold War was intensifying, and both East and West were desperate for secrets. Perhaps the man carried forged documents as part of a covert operation. If he was caught, his handlers may have intervened, erasing all evidence of him. But this theory faltered under scrutiny. Forged documents, yes, but forged with stamps from non-existent borders? That would have been a mistake, not a cover. And why claim allegiance to a nation that could be disproven in minutes? The parallel world theory remained the most tantalizing. Those who supported it pointed out that his behavior didn't match a criminal on the run. He didn't act guilty. He didn't panic. He was annoyed that the officials didn't recognize what he considered an ordinary passport. To him, we were the strange ones, living in a world missing an entire country. Some speculated that he had slipped accidentally through a rift, an unnoticed tear in the fabric of reality. The hotel room, they argued, was simply the point where the rift closed. He hadn't escaped. He had been reclaimed by the world he came from. But if Taured truly existed elsewhere, what would that mean for us? Was there another Earth, almost identical, where history had taken a slightly different turn, where Andorra had never formed, and Taured had thrived instead? If so, then the man's frustration made sense. To him, our denial of Taured was madness, just as his claims seemed impossible to us. And if he had slipped here once, could it happen again? Travelers through Haneda Airport sometimes whisper about a man they've glimpsed in passing, middle-aged, well-dressed, with a leather briefcase. He never speaks, never lingers, always vanishing into the crowd before anyone can follow. Some dismiss it as coincidence, the human mind grasping for patterns. Others insist it is him, forever trapped between worlds, appearing only long enough to remind us of the fragile boundaries that hold our reality together. The truth remains elusive. Was the man from Taured an elaborate hoax, a forgotten Cold War spy, or a wanderer from another dimension? No one can say, but his story endures, not because of the answers it offers, but because of the questions it leaves behind. And perhaps that is the most unsettling part, that one day, without warning, any of us might find our passport rejected, our homeland erased from the map, and the world around us insisting we were never real at all. Decades after the mysterious event, the story of the man from Taured still circulates in whispered conversations and late-night debates. But with each retelling, new details emerge, some perhaps invented, others preserved by memory. The legend has taken on a life of its own, yet at its center remains a man whose existence should have been impossible. Those who studied the case often return to one haunting question: why Tokyo? If the man had truly slipped between worlds, why did he appear in Japan so far from his supposed homeland? Was it coincidence, or was Haneda Airport itself a kind of crossroads, a place where thin walls between realities sometimes falter? Some paranormal researchers believe certain locations act like gateways. They point to Bermuda, to the Mothman sightings in Point Pleasant, to mysterious vanishings across the Alps. Thin places, they call them. Places where time folds and worlds overlap. Haneda, they suggest, might be one of them. Others look deeper into the man himself. Who was he? Witnesses recalled his neatly trimmed beard, his calm manner, his precise fluency in multiple languages. He was educated, worldly, and certain of his identity. He wasn't lost, confused, or insane. He was a man who knew exactly where he came from, and simply could not understand why no one else believed him. The guards who remembered him described something even stranger, the feeling of being watched while standing outside his room. One admitted that at times he felt as though there were two men inside, their shadows overlapping on the wall. Another swore that the air around the door vibrated faintly like static. They dismissed it at the time. After his disappearance, they wondered if those were signs of something far more unsettling, that he wasn't entirely stable in our reality to begin with. Skeptics, of course, have their own explanations. They argue the story is folklore, a campfire tale for the modern age. They say no such man ever existed, that he was invented in the 1960s by writers desperate for strange mysteries to fill their books. But if that were true, how do we account for the consistency of the details? The locked room, the precise description of his passport, the map pointing to Andorra's place in the Pyrenees, the anger in his voice when told his homeland did not exist. Those details are too specific, too persistent, to dismiss entirely. And so the tale has endured, not because it proves anything, but because it leaves us standing on the edge of possibility. If the man was real, then so is Taured. If Taured is real, then our world is not as fixed, not as certain, as we believe. Perhaps somewhere tonight, across a border we cannot cross, a traveler from our world is telling his story. Perhaps in that world, the mystery is not of Taured, but of Andorra, a country no one has ever heard of, and a man who swore it existed. And maybe, just maybe, someone there is still searching for the man who vanished in Tokyo, clutching a passport that proves a country we will never see. The man from Taured remains, to this day, a riddle without a solution. His story has been retold so many times that the line between fact and legend has blurred. Was he truly documented by airport officials in 1954, or did his tale begin later, whispered into existence until belief made it real? No archive confirms it, yet the story refuses to die. What gives it power are the unanswered questions. If he was a fraud, why craft a passport from a nation so easily disproven? Why speak with such conviction, risking exposure at every turn? If he was a spy, why vanish without a trace, leaving no trail behind? And if he was insane, how did he create documents so precise that experts believed them genuine? The more one considers it, the stranger it becomes. Perhaps that is why the story endures, not because it offers a solution, but because it resists one. Travelers today sometimes claim to encounter echoes of him: a businessman in a grey suit, seen briefly in an airport lounge, a passenger with a briefcase whose boarding pass doesn't scan, a man who vanishes in the crowd before anyone can follow. Coincidence, perhaps, or perhaps reminders that the barriers between worlds remain thin, and sometimes they bend. For believers, Taured is more than a myth. It is proof of the multiverse, of alternate Earths where history took different paths. In one, Andorra never existed, and Taured thrived. In another, perhaps Tokyo is the city that doesn't appear on maps. The man from Taured is not an anomaly, they say, but a glimpse, a rare crack in the wall that keeps our worlds apart. Skeptics counter that the story survives because it is compelling. It speaks to our fear of being lost, of having our identity erased, of insisting on our truth while the world denies it. In that way, the man from Taured is less a traveler and more a mirror, reflecting our own dread of being told we don't belong. Yet in the quiet hours of the night, when airports empty and corridors echo with distant footsteps, the legend stirs again. A man approaches the desk, offering a passport from a country no one can find. The clerk frowns, confused, while the traveler grows frustrated, certain of his reality. Papers are stamped, questions are asked, and by morning the room is empty once more. Perhaps the man from Taured was never real, or perhaps he is still out there, moving between borders we cannot cross, forever searching for home in a world that insists his country does not exist. Either way, his mystery endures, and until the day we discover the truth, we are left with a story that asks the most unsettling question of all. If a stranger arrived tomorrow with a passport from a place you've never heard of, would you believe him? The mystery of the man from Taured remains unsolved. Was he a spy, a fraud, or a traveler from another world? No evidence has surfaced. No records explain his sudden disappearance. All that lingers are questions and the uneasy thought that somewhere, across a thin divide, a country named Taured still exists. And if borders between realities are so fragile, who else might cross them, unnoticed, into our world?